Well, hello there, friends. Thanks for clicking on this video and joining in on what's going to be a powder horn build. But before we get to that point, I want to talk a little bit about powder horns and what you can do with cow horn, buffalo horn, things like that. But ultimately, it's going to be a powder horn build. And full disclosure, I got about halfway through this build and I thought, well, why aren't you recording this? I forgot. But let me just backtrack a little bit. In 2025, the Cash LePlue Rendezvous, there were several horns on the prize blanket, and I was able to pick up several of them. And this is the one that we will eventually do the build with, okay? I typically do not like building powder horns out of horns that are already polished, and that's how I got these two, okay? Just simply because when they're thick and rough like this, okay, this is a buffalo horn, I can remove less of the horn and have more to carve with, okay? Here's another small one. You can see that it's real rough, so I can sand these down and leave them thicker than what most would when they polish a horn and sell them. And typically you get these like at Crazy Crow or Dixie Gun Works, and they're already pre-polished, and there again you don't know what you're going to get, because sometimes you're going to get some horns that are polished really thin. Okay, now I know a lot of guys like these thin horns just simply because they can look through them and say, oh look, I got that much powder left, I got that much powder left. I don't like doing that, because when you're walking in the woods and you bang up against a tree, you risk cracking them. It has its advantage, but it also has a disadvantage, okay? Now, before I go any further, for future reference, due to YouTube algorithms and things like that, eventually there's going to be some horner that went through some school and has a certificate hanging up on the wall saying, well, that's not how you do it. This is how I do it. I really don't care. I've never been a horn making school. I'm not part of any horn makers guild. But just to show you, friends, that I know what the hell I'm talking about and I know what the hell I'm doing, here's some salt and pepper shakers I made out of cow horn. And I've made a lot of these over the years and sold them on my trade blanket. Okay, I'm going to show you some really nice ring horn that I ended up winning. But if you don't think I don't know how to do a ring horn, well, there's the proof. And then since this horn was so short, I turned a spout and I drilled this out large enough to hold more gunpowder. Okay, and as you can see, I know how to turn the knobs. Okay, here's a small horn that I made for priming, and if you elect to make a powder horn, a good plug are violin keys. They're already tapered, they're already carved, and they're ready to go. Okay, now there are different things that you can do with cow horn. I don't like doing it because I like the natural curve of the horn. But some guys will make a tapered cone to make the end plug completely round. To get to that point, you can boil this in water for however long it takes, and then you can take a plug like this while it's still hot, and then you can shape the plug to be perfectly round. But like I just said, I don't like doing it because I like using the natural curve of the horn itself to do that, okay? Now, another thing that you can do with cow horn is make cups out of them. I've sold a lot of these over the years. I haven't made any lately because I've got enough horn and stuff like that in my inventory that I just really don't like doing it anymore because I've done it for decades, and I'll show you something here in just a moment or two. But over the years, competing like I have, I've been able to win other horn makers' horns. This is a Charlie McGee horn, and I won this at a rendezvous a few years back for the best all-around competitor, okay? And I was very, very happy to receive this, and then that year, Charlie McGee passed away, so I have his very last horn that he ever donated to the Cache LePlue rendezvous. But you can see the amount of work that he puts into this, that he put into this horn. It's a beautiful horn, and this just stays in my drawer out of the sun because I don't want the sun to dry this out. Will I ever use it? Probably not. Probably not. Another horn that I won would be this little horn. The maker scrimshawed it. You can look at some of the scrimshaw on that side, and then some of the scrimshaw on that side. Just a plain horn, nothing fancy, but some horns lend themselves to be scrimshawed. I also like making small horns because these are what I call day horns. You know, you really don't need to carry a horn this big when you're out deer hunting because you're only going to get, especially with black powder, maybe two shots. So a small horn like this is more than adequate to go on a day hunt. And you can see it's just plain Jane. I've got some pins on it, in it. But this is more than adequate for a day horn. Okay? Yeah, I've got a lot. For my revolvers, I made this horn. Put the top on it with the spout, and you can see I put some dowel pins in here just to accent it, make it look good and fancy. And I keep my powder in this for my revolvers. Okay. Here's another little day horn here. Let me get it untangled. I got quite a few tangled up. This is one that I've done a lot of carving on it. As you can see, let me get some of the lanyards out of the way. So I have the ability to make these things look real fancy. And one of the names I earned at a rendezvous was Captain Brooks. So I made this horn and put that camp name on it. Now this isn't a very thin horn. It's actually thick. I left it thick, so this probably holds about as much powder as my day horn does. So even though it may look like it's a big horn, it doesn't hold a lot of powder. Okay. And I made several years ago one out of a buffalo horn. And I don't typically like making them out of buffalo horn. I'll get to that in just a minute or two. But you can see what kind of carving I did on this one. And this one was scrimshawed, but over the years, I'll have to explain, but over the years, you can't see the scrimshaw as well as you used to when I first did it, okay? If you go back on this channel to the video I did asking about the toe plate on the Cabela's Hawken, I start off by showing two mountain men in the stream with a grizzly bear. One of them is planting a stake for a beaver trap, and the other one has his Hawken rifle aimed towards a grizzly bear that's standing up. That is actually scrimshawed on this horn, and on the back side of it, used to be, you can't see it anymore, a 1775 Revolutionary War map. But you can't see it hardly anymore, and now would be a good time to explain and express why. You would probably want to use cow horn. Cow horn is nothing more than what your fingernails are. It's the same material, can be worked the same way, okay? If you don't take care of your fingernails, they'll grow and they'll get ridges and they'll split and they'll look ugly. So powder horns and things like that need to kind of be taken care of over the life of the horn or anything else, okay? Oh, one other thing real quick. You can make combs out of them too. Take the horn, boil it, flatten it, let it cool, and then carve the rake for a comb. You can do many things with them. The reason why you would want to use cow horn instead of a buffalo horn is because of the structure. Cow horn, the hairs and the fibers are tight. I mean tight, tight, tight. When it comes to buffalo horn, they tend to open up a little bit. The hair, the grain structure is not as tight as it is on cow horn. So that's why cow horn is the preferred material this day and age. Now this horn right here, this was the very first horn that I ever carved, right here. And you can see I did some engrailing work, and my first attempt at scrimshaw was the bear, and over the years I've done some other scrimshaw work on it. Okay, and you can see the bear's head carved out of the bone. I did that. Okay. Now, take a good look at this horn, and it's aged naturally. Okay. From time to time, I'll put some olive oil on it just to, because typically back in the day, when you used your horn quite frequently, you always had the oil from your hands, or if you were, processing some meat, that residual oil that's on your hand would get rubbed off on the powder horns, and it would make it last for a very long time. Now, how long have I had that powder horn? Like I said, it was the very first one that I ever made. There's a picture of me, the first rendezvous I ever walked in to, and if you look right here, there's that horn. I think you can see I was much more handsome and young at that time. But there's that powder horn right there. I hadn't even scrimshot it at that point. And this powder horn has been with me on many, 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 many rendezvous. And in fact, this past year, 2025, I took this to Castle Blue. I hadn't taken it for a number of years because I was taking that buffalo horn. And I almost had a mishap. For whatever reason, I started looking at it, and this end plug was starting to work itself loose. And I thought, well, what the heck? And it finally came off. Fortunately, it did it in camp, and I didn't lose any powder or much powder. If this would have happened on the trail, that had been the end of my gunpowder. But I just got it home, cleaned up the 5-minute epoxy I had on it, and just re-glued it together, and she's good to go. So, with all of this out of the way, if you're going to build a powder horn, it is my recommendation that you start with a cow horn, because you can get them sanded much, much finer. They polish up much, much better, and they last a lot longer just because of the hair and the fiber structure. So, at this point, I'm going to put all this stuff away, and I'm going to finish up this horn first, and then we'll turn around and I'll show you what I do to make a usable powder horn. My method of doing it, not someone else's, but my method. So, let's get started. Okay, so to get started, let's talk about choosing the right horn. Okay, If you look at this horn, it has a curve to it. And all horns do. There's a right and a left. Okay. What you'll want to do is pick a horn that has a curve that is going to fit nicely the curvature of your body on what side of your body you're going to carry your powder horn on. Okay. And for a flintlock shooter, just a word of caution, you'll want to carry your horn on the opposite side of the lock. And the same would hold true with your percussion. And the reason being is, and I'll use myself as an example, since I shoot left-handed, in my flintlock, the flash pan and the lock is on the left side of my rifle. Okay? If I were to make a horn that carries on my left side, and if I forget to put the plug back in and this horn is sitting on my left side unplugged, I have direct access to however much gunpowder is in this horn, and it will explode. So you'll want to bear that in mind when choosing a horn. What side are you going to carry it on? Now, since this particular horn has got the curve like this, it will be carried, or it should be carried, on a person's left side, which would benefit a right-handed shooter. And in particular, once again, if you're a flintlock, everything is flying out to the right side of the gun and away from you and away from your horn that you should be carrying on your left side. Okay? Now that you've chosen a horn, and before you're ready to cut the tip off, what you'll want to do is get some wire, unless you can look down the horn and see where the solid mass, because these horns are not hollow all the way to the tip. The tips are usually solid, but where does the solid begin? So get yourself a wire, and if you can, try to mimic the curvature of where you're going to test the horn for where the solid mass begins. You don't have to be perfect, but something close. Okay, so I'm going to shove that in there. There's the positive stop. I'll hold it right here at the base. And it looks like it's stopping about right here. So that's not going to leave too much room for carving, but bear in mind, the closer you get to the tip of the horn, the thicker the horn's going to get. If you look at this end right here, the end that would go up against the head, it's pretty thin. And I'll show you momentarily what I mean about being so thin that you can see through it. But I'll get to that in a moment. But don't just take it for granted that that's where the solid mass starts. You'll want to do it in a couple of different places to get a feel for it. Because remember, there is a curve in it, so you could be misreading it a little bit. So there's where I'm going to stop it and put it on the horn, and you can see I'm a little further this way than I was this way. So mark it. Okay, let me do that real quick. About right there. Now I want to be forward of that just simply because you want to have enough depth for your plug to have something to grip. Basically what I'm saying is you just don't want the hole right here and then nothing to support on the inside for your peg. Okay? Now I'm probably going to do this one a little bit different just simply because if you put the two horns together, I get the bases pretty much even, and if you look, this horn's a little bit taller, so I may not put or use the tip of the horn for the plug. Now let me just mention something right here. For me, Out of all the decades that I've been making powder horns, I am the only one, and believe me, I look at a lot of powder horns and see what other horners are doing. To date, I have never ever seen another horn maker use the tip of the horn for the plug. I don't always get away with that because the horn dictates how I'm going to do the end, but I prefer, and since these were a prize, I prefer to get horns that have long, narrow tips so that I can use the tip of the horn for the plug. And since it's looking like this horn right now doesn't lend itself to that, probably what I will do is I will just sand this back far enough so that I can make a wooden plug. So that, for me, is pretty much determined with the wire, okay? Because I still need a little bit of depth on the inside to support the plug. So that's the first step. So I'm going to go into my shop and I'm going to sand this down flat, and at the same time I'm going to flatten this out also. But before I do that, let me show you real quick what I was talking about, being able to see through the horn, because these are polished or sanded real thin. I'll try to do this before the breeze kicks back up. But there's the inside of the horn, and if you look, you can see the shadow of my finger going up and down. Let's see here. You can see my finger there. That's pretty thin. Okay, to flatten the base, I'll just put it on my table sander, and to flatten the tip of the horn, I'll do the same thing. Now, if you don't have tools like this available, just get yourself a flat block of wood, sandpaper, and just work it slow. What I'm looking to do is to get that flat. I have a flat block of wood right here, so when I get it sanded, I'll just set the block of wood on the base here, and I'll check to see if there's any gaps. And right now I've got one on this side right here on the horn. So I'm going to sand it flat and then check it. And as you saw, I hope, I did it a couple of different directions just for me, make sure that I'm getting it flat all the way around. But I'll test it with the block of wood. Block of wood's on it, and I'll look around, spin it around, and I see no gaps at all. So I know that that's perfectly flat. Now, if you look at the horn, you can see it's not perfectly flat. It's a little bit of an angle, slightly. But that's what I was talking about, maintaining, you know, the natural curve of the horn and using that to make the powder horn. Now, if I want this perfectly flat, obviously, the thing to do would be to hold it at the angle until everything comes down, sanded perfectly flat. But once again, I don't like that. I want to use the natural curvature of the horn. Alright, now I'm going to work on the tip. I'm going to sand some of that back. I'm not going to take off too much, because the more I take off here, the more I'm going to have to blend the horn up to the plug. Now, as I do this, one thing you'll want to keep in mind is the diameter of the hole that you plan on drilling into the horn. I typically like to keep it a little under quarter inch. Quarter inch really helps the powder to flow very well. But since I'm looking at this, yeah, I'm probably about there right now. But I'm going to go ahead and take it down just a little bit more. And then I'll drill the hole. Now the tip, you'll want to try to get as flat as you can. And if you observed, I was kind of like mocking, like I was pouring some powder. I was looking at the angle of the tip and how it would look pouring. And pouring, it looks pretty doggone good. It might be just a fuzz high on this side right here, but I'm going to drill the hole and then I'll look at everything at that point. Okay, let me get you into some good light. That's what I've sanded down. Now this is where you want to be very, very cautious and slow, because as you can see, if I were to take a drill bit and try to drill a straight hole, I might end up coming off here because of the curvature of the horn itself. If you kind of eyeball that, you can see what I'm talking about. So what I'll typically do is I'll put a pencil mark what I think is going to be center. And then I'll look at it like this, and I'll try to line that up with the curvature of the horn. Because remember, the drill bits go in straight, but there's a way to overcome that. And I'll show that here in just a minute. But kind of eyeball that and visualize you drilling, trying to drill straight through where you're going to end up at because of the curve. And just a side note, if you do this and you do mess up, like I've done a time or two, what I'll do is I'll finish off the plug end and I'll cut everything off about right here, and then I'll make cups out of this end. And then I'll cut a slot into here. I'll plug the end at the cut, and I'll cut a slot in here, and I'll sell it as a business card holder. So not all is lost if this doesn't go right. But let me see if I can get this, and then I'll talk you through it afterwards. Perhaps we'll see how it goes. So I hope you can see what I was talking about. I went in a little ways, and if you can look at that hole, I don't know if the sun can pick it up, but if you can look at that hole and then imagine that going straight through, I'd end out coming off to the side here. So what you want to do at this point, since you're going to make this hole larger anyways, try to change the angle to suit where you think the center of the horn is going to be. So another little technique is at this point you can increase the size of this hole, which will give you more of an opportunity to change the direction, and hopefully you can get it straight in the center of the horn or thereabouts. Let me increase that hole and then take a look at what I want to do with it. So you can see I've increased the diameter of that hole, which now, as I mentioned, which now gives me some room to change my angle internally, and hopefully I'll dead center it. And I can tell you right now, just having the experience, when I'm looking at it straight on, I can see that I'm going to have to change the angle of the end of it right here just slightly, because it's favoring. Well, wait a minute, before I say that, now that should still pour pretty good, because assuming that somebody picking a horn up, they're not going to pour it like this. They're going to pour it with the natural tilt of the hand. So that still looks pretty good now that I say that. So let me see if I can dead center this. or get close to it. Okay, now I'm going to enlarge that. And that's the reason why I enlarge the hole, so it gives me just a little bit room to angle if I have to make that adjustment. So look at it closely, and imagine what you need to do. I get through. Okay, now looking at it in the sun, I did pretty good. So now I'm going to enlarge that hole to the outside diameter of this, and then look and see if I can go another step or two up. So I think I can go to 5/16, and if that doesn't leave me enough room around here, because you can see one side, I've got plenty of room on one side, but on this top side I don't have as much. I'm going to go ahead and drill it because, you know, I want ease of pouring of the gunpowder. And I'm going to go to 5/16. This is 1/4 inch right now. And I'm going to look at it and make a determination at that point. Now, there's something that I should mention, since I'm not going to be able to do it on the horn that we're building. If you elect to use the tip of the horn for the plug, make your dowel, drill the inside of the horn, waller it out, get your wooden plug to fit, and then set it down where you want it to go. And before you epoxy it, put some packing tape, some clear packing tape right here, because when you epoxy the horn on to the dowel, you'll want to have a way to release it, so you're not gluing to the horn, but you're gluing to the piece of tape, and that'll come right off when you separate them. I use 5-minute epoxy. I get the plug down to where I want, and then of course I've pre-fit everything before I get to the point of applying glue, and you can see I've got that fitting really good. Okay, and like I said, you'll want to wallow this out a little bit so that when you do put the tip onto your dowel, you can maneuver it a little bit and get it to set perfectly flat. I just use 5-minute epoxy, and I probably let it go for about maybe 10 minutes, and then I very gently try to get it separated. When that epoxy hardens, not cures, but hardens enough that you can, and you might even have to use a pair of pliers, just gingerly with a pair of pliers you can get that separated, and then it'll finish curing out straight. The reason why I'm mentioning this, because if you do this, do not glue the base plug on before this is accomplished. Because if for some reason this doesn't work out and you break that piece of dowel right here, you'll have to drill it out, and then with the base plug off, it'll just drop out. So don't do this base plug until you get this part of the horn done. Now when it comes to this one, it's not a big deal because I'm going to fit it as I shape it. So that's not an issue. That only applies if you're going to use the tip of the horn so that you have something else to carve. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and drill that to 5/16, and we'll see what the whole thing looks like at that point. All right. Yeah, I have enough wall here and on the top so that when I build the plug, and there again, since I'm building a wooden plug, that's not as critical as if you were going to do this. But that's actually going to look pretty good, because when I look at this side compared to the top and the bottom, if I just remove some horn over here, I can make that opening look pretty much circular. Okay, now since I'm going to be building a plug, a wooden plug, I can go ahead and glue the bottom on. So let me show you how I do that. So since I have some scrap maple, can't use this for much of anything else, I trace the outside diameter of the horn. Okay, I got that accomplished. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to shape this so that this fits on the inside of the horn, so that it sets flush right here. Now I'm also going to thin this down. This is quite thick. This was the scrap piece of maple that I had. I elected to use. But what I'm going to do also is I'm also going to bevel it, or taper it, because the inside of the horn is tapered. So I need to match the taper so that it sets flush right here. I'll get that accomplished and I'll move on to the next step with you. So if it doesn't fall out, you can see I got it. It's not a perfect fit. It doesn't have to be, because I'll show you what I'm going to do with the next step. But you can see the bevel I put on it. Alright, I'm going to go find another piece of wood and I'm going to flatten that out, make sure that it's plain flat, and then I'll show you the next step in the process, because I'm going to use black walnut for the base plug, for the spout stopper, because what I plan on doing is when I get to that point is drilling some holes and using some black walnut pegs. Okay, I decided to do something maybe a little on the fancy side. For me, it's not fancy, but if you notice this piece of black walnut, it's about 3/4 thick, and I have traced out 2 profiles of the base of this horn. I also traced out the base of the horn, this piece of maple. What I'm going to do is I'm going to plane this down to maybe 1/4, 3/8 thick. It's 3/4 right now. Get it perfectly flat. I'll cut these out square, and then I'm going to glue this piece of maple in between these 2 pieces, so that when I go to shaping the base plug, you're going to have that nice white maple color in between the 2 sandwiched pieces of black walnut. So let me do a little bit of work and I'll kind of show you what it's going to look like before I glue it up. So while I unclamp my clamps to the glue up, I'm going to have a little discussion, a few things. I've kind of changed my mind on one of the directions I was going to go. But first of all, you can see by the time I sand everything away, the glue up should look pretty good, and that's going to end up being the base plug. But that's to be accomplished a little bit later, just simply because I want to glue this piece onto what's going to be the base plug. And when I get this attached and glued, then I'm going to use some 5-minute epoxy, and this is shaped a certain way. That's going to be the inside support of the plug. Okay, So I think you can kind of get a feel for where I'm going with this. But I can go ahead and glue this, but I'm not going to attach it to the horn just simply because I'm not going to be turning a wooden plug. I decided to use a piece of deer antler, and that will be the front plug. Now obviously I'm going to shorten that up and I'm going to fit it, but like I stated earlier, I don't want to glue this on until I know this is working properly, because if for some reason I have an oh oops and I break the plug inside the horn here, I won't be able to get it out of the entire horn. So I'm going to be working on that along with finishing up the previous horn that I was working on, and I'll show you how I do the engrailing and the carving. But this particular horn has got a it's African lacewood for the plug, and for the lanyard or the strap I just glued on a piece of antler, and I'll probably do the same thing with the horn I'm working on now. But I've got a little bit more sanding to do, and then I'm going to start polishing this. As you can see, I've got the cones in place, and I got to sand a little bit of the epoxy away. But one thing that I want to mention is, you know, if you're interested in doing any of this buckskinning stuff and you're just getting started, once again, it truly is a mindset. As the book of buckskinning notes right here, it's a philosophy. And it really is. And all my life I've kind of had my own philosophy. Having grown up in relatively a low-income family, I've had to learn to do a lot of things on my own. Just to backtrack a little bit, when I got interested in buckskinning, I spent a year in Arizona going to all the rendezvous that were offered locally in the state of Arizona. And I looked at the wares that was on traders' tables, and I looked at some prices, and they quite honestly scared me. Being the low-income family, I was really thinking, how in the hell can I get involved with this and not, you know, lay out a lot of money? Because, you know, a rifle is going to cost you, for a decent rifle, it's going to cost you, you know, upwards of $1,000. You could probably shop, you know, used gun stores, or maybe some old family member or some old friend might have a muzzle loader laying around that they may be interested in getting rid of. But I want to get back to powder horns. When I spent that year going around to all the rendezvous in Arizona, I looked at the craftsmanship and workmanship of powder horns, and there was one that really caught my eye. It was scrimshod with some elk and some elk tracks around the base plug, and I mean, it really looked good. And you know, the artist wanted $400 for that powder horn. I thought, Jesus, I can't afford $400 for a powder horn, especially something that I would have eventually used in a hunting situation, used at every rendezvous that I've gone to compete with. So what I decided to do was, thinking on my own terms, you know, for $400, I can buy an awful lot of books and teach myself how to carve and make powder horns. Now this book right here, Muzzleloader Magazines, it's the Book of Buckskinning #2. This book in particular has a huge section on how to make powder horns. From start to beginning, different techniques, and, you know, engrailing, how to do base plugs, things like that. So for $400, I invested in a couple of these buckskinning books, okay? And I forget why I had actually, just thumbing through it real quick. They have a section on scrimshawing and also engraving powder horns, okay? So these are some very, very good reference books if you're interested in getting into this. Now, and my archery bow building ended up being, you know, the same type of thing. For what somebody wanted to build me a bow, it's like, you know, I can buy a lot of books, magazines, and teach myself how to build bows. And I did the same thing with brain tanning and powder horn making. And I was shocked, just simply because 5 years later, I walk into a gun shop in Phoenix, and there's that same powder horn in a display case for the same amount of money, $400. And I kind of had to chuckle because, like I mentioned, the first year I went to all the rendezvous in Arizona and I checked things out. Then I took another entire year to make powder horns and do beadwork, try to refine my skills of brain tanning. Back then, I'm not bragging about it. Now I will, but I won't brag about what I did back then. But anyhow, that first rendezvous that I ever set up as a trader, I sold 18 powder horns at no less than $80 a piece. You do the math and then compare that to the one horn that this craftsman made and had been trying to sell for over 5 years at $400. Now I can state with a surety that from the time I started learning how to make powder horns up until this present moment, I've sold hundreds of powder horns. The only difference between what I've done and say what others have done, no one is ever gonna walk into a buckskinning camp and say, hey, is that a Mike Brooks powder horn? It's never gonna happen. Because I don't have that certificate sitting up on my wall saying that I went through the Powder Horn Guild of America. Yeah. To me, that just feeds ego. If I can sit here and say the first rendezvous I ever set up and I sold 18 powder horns at no less than $80 compared to the one guy that was still trying to sell that one powder horn for $400, I think I can wear the ring of accomplishment. Okay, so now I'm going to get back to finishing up these tasks. Like I mentioned previously, the next thing I'm going to do is, bear in mind, previously I mentioned there was a crack in the maple and I have that crack extended onto the outside here. So I'm going to trace the powder horn on the opposite end, or the base of the powder horn on the opposite end. And then I'm going to glue this piece within that tracing. And I think you can probably gather that by the time I sand or cut away all that excess wood, I'm going to be well beyond that crack. So I'm going to get that accomplished, and then I'm going to figure out what I want to do with that bone for the front plug. And if I come across something that I think it's worth mentioning, I'll turn the camera back on and we'll discuss it. So as previously mentioned, make sure you put a piece of clear tape up here. And what I do is I just take an X-Acto knife and I just cut a couple slits in it. And then just clean it out. Okay, got it cleaned out. And insert the peg. And I've already, I put a mark on it as to how far I want to go down with it. I've got the piece of bone hollowed out, and double check it, make sure that that's where I'm going to want it. And I can't see any light through it, so I think I'm pretty good. So I'm going to mix up some epoxy, fill the hole, and then hold it tight for about 5 minutes. And then I'm going to let everything set for about maybe 15-20 minutes, and then I'll pull everything out and see how it looks at that point. Okay, I got it. She sits in there good and snug. You got to give just a little bit of a twist to get it off, and then you can see, well, the camera's probably not going to pick it up, but I've got it lined pretty good with the plane. You can't see any gaps through it. I'm not sure what I want to do with the overhang yet. I might just choose to leave that just simply because I don't have much of a wall left as far as the bone's concerned. So I might just leave that as part of the horn itself. So now I'm ready to glue on the base, because this plug comes in and out pretty easy. Didn't break it. It's one of the reasons why I like using hickory, because it is a pretty tough wood. So I'm going to get this glued up, and I dry fitted it and realized that I should have moved this insert over this direction just a little bit, because you can kind of see I made a note on the horn so that when I put this together to favor one side. And if you look at where the maple is, I don't know how well the camera's picking it up, but I should be able to sand just to the edge of that maple. And typically when I do these, I pretty much start off flat for just a little bit, and then I taper everything in and kind of like dome it a little bit. You'll see that when I get to that point. But knowing how I do it, I should be able to blend all of this in. Of course, that's going to get sanded away, this little step right here. But you'll see what I'm talking about when I get to that point. Now what I like to do when I'm doing this, instead of putting the epoxy around here, I like putting it on the inside of the horn, and then when I line everything up, the epoxy can seep and drip down around to the edges, and it, to me, for me at least, I think it seals a little bit better. I will put a little bit just on the edge right here so that there's a seal at this point and the wood. Okay, I pretty much have the shape that I was looking for. Now comes the sanding and the final shaping with the palm sander. And then what I plan on doing is, since I have a horn stopper, antler stopper, I'm going to use another piece of antler, and I'm going to attach that to the top here, and I'll drill a hole through the center of it to tie a lanyard through. Now how I end up doing this is I'll drill a small hole here, and then I'll thread a screw in it, a wood screw, you know, down about yay far, and then I'll cut the top of it off, and then I will drill a hole into this, and then I'll thread the two together. And as I'm threading it, I will put some 5-minute epoxy on it to absolutely hold this in place. So when I get all of that accomplished, then I'll show you what I'm going to do to cut the rings. And I might do some step in it. I might do some engrailing. I think I'm thick enough right in through here to do that, but I'll decide that as I'm shaping the top. So it's getting close to lunchtime. So I figured before I go to lunch, what I would do would get the fake pins set. And you can determine from this point to where you want to place them down. If you need to mark it, the easiest thing to do is get yourself a flexible ruler, because you can actually, let me get this in here, flex with the contour of the horn, and that way you can get your mark place just right. And remember the diameter of this. So I've got these marked. I think I'm going to end up putting 8 in there, but I've got the center mark punch, so when I put these in the center, the top of the pin is going to be just a little bit higher. So when you lay this out, bear that in mind. So I'm going to go ahead and get them drilled, and when you drill them, you know, obviously you can get them dial caliper, measure what the diameter is, and find a drill bit just smaller than that, because you can always drill up to the next size. But if you make it too big to begin with, you're not going to have a good clean fit. So I'm going to get these drilled and get this cut up into the number of pieces that I need, and then get them glued in. Okay, I've already got them sanded flush, and I've applied some Watco penetrating oil so that you can see how it turned out. You can do that, or in this powder horn you can put the cones or the pins, or you can elect not to do anything at all. It's up to you. Now let's talk about carving the rings so that you can tie your powder horn strap to. Now you can just carve one right here if you want, or you could do what I do, carve 2 to separate the center. And if you were going to do any flat sanding, any engrailing, then you would want to carve another ring about right here or so, and then sand all of this flat all the way around. So basically you're creating a flat edge like right here, and then another flat edge here, another flat edge here. So by the time you get done, it has a very sharp, like a stop sign figure to it. Just, it's not all round, it's just sanded flat. And then because they're curved, and in particular on the outside, your flats are going to be a little bit wider than say what they're going to be here, and these on the inside are going to be real narrow. So obviously I'm not electing to do that on this particular horn for all intents and purposes, other than the polishing, and I have a high-speed polisher that I can wax this and buff it to a shine. So anyhow, that one's done for all intents and purposes. Now this one, let's get started with carving a series of rings so that your powder horn strap can tie to. Okay, you can kind of see, I hope, that I'm just about to finish the circle, and you can see by using the piece of tape as a guide, I'm just about right there. By the time I file that direction, I will have it complete and it'll be lined up. Now you might be asking, how deep do you want to go? I usually generally try to go about half the depth of the file that I'm using, but ultimately you'll want to go as deep as what's necessary to keep your powder horn strap in place and not falling out of the grooves. But a general rule of thumb, especially on a file this size, you want to go about half its depth, and I can't read that number or the size on this without my glasses. So I've made a decision regarding the carving of this particular horn. If you look at the hole, you can see that this top side and this bottom side's pretty thick. It's not perfectly round, but because of that, these two sides right here will lend itself to do some flat filing, which is what I'm going to do. Now, typically speaking and traditionally, a lot of carved powder horns back in the day from where you would tie your lanyard to your powder horn strap. They would definitely or try to work to thin it down, is what I've done right here. But you know, like I said, instead of using a wooden plug, I've elected to use the entire horn as the plug, which allows more carving like I've done here. But you can see that from this point down to here it gets fairly thin. Okay, and if you look at a lot of powder horns historically, you'll see that there's a lot of different shapes and a lot of different things that people do up to the point of the wooden plug. Okay, now once again, this was my horn that I first learned to carve, and you can see that it does kind of narrow down right here. Now the horn that I was working on previously, if I take the plug out and look at the amount of material that's left around here, it would definitely lend itself to be narrowed down right in through here. Obviously I elected not to do that, but I am going to work at filing flats where it's thick. So I'll get that accomplished, turn the camera back on, and we'll take a look and see what it looks like at that point. So I've got the flats done. Now bear in mind, you know, you can sand away as much as you really want to make it look aesthetically pleasing to yourself in your own eye. But since I've put flats right here, what I'm going to do now, and I've already started on this side, is I'm going to sand this side of the bone flat so that it comes close and matches the flats on the horn. Okay, and I've also decided to do a little bit of what they call crown work. I'm going to take this slow moving Dremel tool and a diamond bit, and I'm going to grind in these little crown points right here. Now my plan is to go all the way around here, and on the part where I've sanded the flats, I'm only going to go in between the flats, the back side and on the inside. So I'll get all of that accomplished, and we'll see what she looks like at that point. And maybe I'll make another decision, maybe I won't. That's one of the reasons why I like, you know, doing powder horns. Just simply because as an artist, I don't really consider myself an artist, I'm just a worker. But, you know, as you're sanding down one part, you know, doing the curves with the file work, you can be thinking ahead of what you might want to do later to decorate the horn, which would ultimately symbolize you if you're going to make these for yourself. So I'm going to continue on here, and we'll see if I decide anything else along the way. Well, there it is. I got her done, and what I'm going to do is go polish it on my high-speed buffer. If you don't have one available, what you can do, and what I would suggest, is finish up with 400 to 600 grit sandpaper, and then get some 4/0 steel wool, and then just buff it with steel wool. And you can either choose to leave it that way, or get some like paste wax, Johnson paste wax, and just buff the wax in it, and it'll get real shiny. Don't know if it'll get as shiny as this, but I'm going to go polish this with my high-speed buffer, and I'll be right back. Well, there she is, all polished up, and if you can see, there's an indentation right here. That was a natural defect in the horn itself. Who knows, it could have been damaged as it was growing on the cow. But there it is. Anyhow, I did the engrailing, as you can see, and I blended in the flats with the stopper, and it's good to go. And here's the other one that I had was working on earlier, and she's all polished up and good to go. So now I have another project to finish up. Always busy. So I want to thank everybody for joining in on these, or at least this one powder horn build. And I hope that you'll give it a thumbs up and share it with your bestest of buds. And I guess we'll catch you in the next video. Bye.